What's up, guys? Today, I don't know why this occurred to me today, why I thought of this, but today we're going to talk about learning to drive. Learning to drive. I guess the reason I thought of it is because my wife says I can't drive. I think I'm an excellent driver. Excellent driver. Like some other people you've heard of, but and in fairness to her, it's not so much that I can't drive, that I can't park, according to her. But I keep telling her the reason that I don't park well is because I don't care how I park. It's not important to me. But anyway, let's not get bogged down in those details. Let's get to the learning to drive portion of today's video. When I learned to drive, okay, and this is something that today, and I guess this could be a nightmare of the 70s video, because I've done a lot of videos about how things were in the 70s and how that kids today or young people today would think that is an absolute nightmare. And learning to drive like I did, which was not in the 70s, it was in the 80s, but you get the idea. Actually, was it in the 70s? No, it was in the 80s. So anyway, but the very early 80s. But kids today, a lot of them, if you haven't noticed, they don't even want to drive. I mean, they have no desire. When I was, I just remember I could not wait. Absolutely could not wait until I could drive. And I wanted to learn to drive as soon as humanly possible. As soon, and it didn't have to be legal. It didn't have to be anything other than me learning how to drive, because I want to drive more than anything in the world, to get my own car, to get out of the house, to go do whatever. That's what we were all like. Unlike today. But anyway, this may be the biggest nightmare of the 70s video I have made, because I cannot think of anything that blows me away more than a bunch of kids that don't want to drive or they're scared to drive. Now, today maybe it's more dangerous to drive. I don't know. The cars are safer. But when I learned to drive, I'll tell you where I learned the most when it came down to, getting the driver's license. My grandmother would take me to the Chickamauga National Battlefield, which is in Fort Oglethorpe, near Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. And there was hardly ever any cars or anything in there. And they had all these roads, miles and miles of roads that I could get on and drive without any pressure, nobody around me, on an actual road. Now, looking back on it, was a federal park a good place for me to learn how to drive? Probably not. Probably, that's one of those things, if you commit a crime there, it's a federal crime, But anyway, or if I committed a traffic offense, it would be federal. But anyhow, that's where I went. And I could go really slow and drive around in those roads and all that kind of stuff. And it was okay. And I learned. And then when I went to get my license and take the driver's test, I drove her old 1967 Malibu, which I still have. My dad has. He won't let me drive it because he thinks I'm a bad driver too. But anyway, we had that old car and it barely ran. And it kept stalling out. So while I was doing my driving test, the driving instructor, every time I would stop, the car would die. And then we would struggle to get it started again. And then we would drive and he goes, okay, stop here. And I would stop and it would die. It was a nightmare. It was horrible trying to drive that stupid car. And so he finally said, look, just keep your foot on the gas. He goes, this is not how you drive, but keep your foot on the brake and your foot on the gas when you stop, so you can keep the car running so we can get this thing over with. And I was a wreck by the time but anyway, I passed the test. Because back then, you passed the test. So, I'd hate to see how a person failed the test back then. But anyway, we were taught, and this is the thing that was really kind of crazy. We were taught to drive by a bunch of people that when they learned to drive, it was like cavemen driving. There were no laws. There were no rules. They did anything when they grew up. Like, in other words, the older people, when I was a kid, that generation, the people from the 40s and They just drove anything, anywhere, anytime, anyway. You didn't have to have a license. You didn't have to be in a safe, They just did whatever. And they didn't think twice about putting you in a car, handing you a set of keys, and saying, go. They could care less. They were perfectly okay with you doing that. My granddad, I remember one time we were in Alabama and I was with my grandfather, and we were in his old truck, and he was absolutely terrible. He really was a bad driver. But anyway, he said one day we were out and he goes, you want to drive? And I was like 13 or 12 or something. I was really young. I wasn't anywhere near, He's like, you want to drive? And I was like, I was so young I didn't even want to drive yet, And I was like, of course, given the opportunity, I was like, yes, absolutely, I want to drive. He's like, okay, well, I said, I don't know should I drive? And he was like, no, it's okay. And so he pulled over on a highway. Now, it wasn't a crowded highway. This was in rural Alabama. He pulls over. He said, well, okay, get over here. And that's the brake. And that's the gas, and this is, he shifted the gears, and he kind of gave me a very brief explanation of how things work. And he said, just, don't go too fast. So I start driving down the highway, and I don't know how fast, I'm sure I was going slow and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, I wasn't doing too good, apparently. He goes, okay, well, that's probably enough. Let's pull over. And there was a church parking lot. He goes, let's pull over in this church parking lot over here and just, kind of ease in on the brake. Don't hit it too hard, and all this kind of stuff, and I'll drive. And I was like, okay. So I go pulling in this church parking lot, and there was a space, there was a set of steps in the front of the church and the doors. It was a little church. And then there was, you could just drive right by where the steps were in that parking lot. And so, I pulled into that parking lot going too fast, didn't understand how the brakes work, hit the steps, broke the steps of this church, and but I got the car stopped, or the truck stopped. So he gets out and looks at it and goes, okay, all right, let's go. I was like, what do we need? He goes, nah, it's okay, they can fix that. Down the road. And so, anyway, that was my first driving experience. I hit a church. And the next driving experience I had, I think, is at our house, we had a tractor. We had this, area behind the house. It's a big area with some trees kind of scattered around, but it was all cleared out and stuff. And we had a field up past that. But anyway, my dad, let me drive the tractor. Now, that's a little different than driving a car. It was a little harder because you had the clutch and all. But anyway, I ran that tractor right into a tree. And I don't remember how old I was then. But that was my driving experience. So that's the example for you to see that those people just, because, they started driving when they were kids. They got married when they were 15 and 16. Their adult life started early. So they expected you to just get in there and do whatever, And so... my dad would tell me all these stories about him and his brothers. He had several brothers, and or he had two brothers, and then he had a sister. But anyway, they lived in a town. They didn't live out in the country. They lived in town, and they all had cars. He was like, oh, me and my brother, and then some other guy. We went in and bought some car, for $5, and $5 for a car or something crazy, And it didn't have, the doors, we had to tie the doors. The doors would just come open, while you were riding down the road. And we were driving that car, and the door fell open, and one of the guys fell out, and I ran into a fence. It was just like all these stories about them having wrecks over and over again, running into people's yards, None of them had a driver's license. It was just like, they just did whatever. And they didn't get put in jail or anything. They just, the police would just be, all right, son, now you need to get home and don't drive this car out here in town. You're going to run in and kill I mean, it was just it was the Wild West. The Wild West of driving. And that's how they learned. You just, it's like learning how to swim, and you just throw them in the pool and go swim or drown, So that's how we learned how to drive. All my friends, and we all got cars. As soon as we were 16, we had some kind of car, no matter what kind of piece of crap it was, or we had a car sitting somewhere we're trying to fix that we could drive. And it was just a matter of time till we got this car put together. And so, and we all had cars, that were at least 10, 15 years old at least. If you had a car newer than that, you were rich. But anyway, I remember when my friends, and we all turned, 16 about the same time, and we got our real license, where it wasn't a learner's permit. And one of our friends had apparently failed a grade, so he was a little older than us, so he got his car first. And he got this big, gigantic, like an Impala. It was big. And he got it, and everybody's like, hey, did you hear it? Gene got a car. Can you believe it? Oh my God, And we were so excited because Gene got a car. And about 2 or 3 days later, Gene's mom brought him to school, and we were like, Gene, where's your car? Gene had been driving his car like an idiot in the grocery store parking lot, the Red Food store, grocery store parking lot. And he was showing off to somebody. And the parking lot apparently was pretty much empty. And he hit one of the lights, and the light pole fell on top of his car. Ruined his car. So Gene had a car about 3 or 4 days, which was a good lesson for us. You don't play around in a car. A car's not a toy for you to, I would get that speech, about how you need to be responsible in a car and how important it was. And then I would get a story about, how they drove a car through a cow pasture and ran through a fence, So I kind of got mixed signals there about car safety, that kind of thing. And so we pretty much approached it the same way. Once we learned barely how to drive, we set out on our own in those big old cars and ran into whatever, which is the same way it happens today. We do the same thing today. We get our kids out there. But our kids now, they can get driving lessons. They can do all this virtual stuff on the computer. They learn, the laws are way stricter and all that kind of stuff. And it is scary because there's way more traffic and all that stuff today. But, it is a different situation than it was, when I learned, taught by the cavemen. I'll just call them cavemen generation. Because, they grew up, riding buggies and horses and all that kind of stuff. And so when they got cars, it was just see what they'd do. But it's just so funny. We would do stuff like we would be riding down the road. If we were going to the same place, we'd be following each other. If you got stopped at a red light and your friend was behind you, you jump out of your car, run back there and open their hood, because you could open the hoods back then without pushing the button and the thing, you just opened it. So we'd run back there and open their hood and get in our car, and then the light would change and we'd take off and they'd be sitting there with their hood open. We'd do stupid stuff like that. And we had a fantastic time, and more fun than you can ever imagine, riding around in our cars, going and doing whatever we wanted. We just loved it. And it just blows my mind that today's kids don't get that opportunity to have fun. There were people had wrecks, and it is a serious, it's a car. It's dangerous. But it just shows the difference between back then. We kind of bridged the gap between, like I said, the people that just did whatever, like my dad and my grandparents, and the people, in today where we, try to be safer. But anyway, it was crazy. So learning to drive was is always a traumatic experience. But for us, I guess it wasn't as traumatic. I mean, I had plenty of times where I had scares because I was going too fast, I might have got a couple of tickets, a week sometimes. I may have had some issues po-po guys from time to time because I drove a car that they thought was, my car wasn't really that fast, but they thought it was fast because they stopped me all the time. I don't understand why they, but anyway, because I was a really good driver, a really good fast driver. And yeah, I didn't have that many wrecks. I had a few, you know. Who among you hasn't had a wreck as a teenager? Throw the first stone. No, I'm just anyway, it was fun. I had a blast learning to drive. If you took a kid now and stuck him in some of them circumstances I was in and put the keys in their hand and tell them to drive, they would get under the car and hide. They would be scared to death. They would not drive. You know, but anyway, nightmares from the 70s, learning to drive. Thanks for watching, guys.